It was such a privilege to be Andrea's executive producer for 6 years. She was a woman of surprising juxtapositions. She was a woman of size, whose favorite car was an Austin Mini Cooper. She was an environmentalist, and she was a golfer, too. And she was a night owl who hosted a morning show. But I think perhaps the most interesting juxtaposition about Andrea, fascinating, which was one of her favorite adjectives used, one of the most fascinating juxtapositions about Andrea, was her ability to put everybody at ease and, at the same time, make us profoundly uncomfortable confronting issues of racism, sexism, and homophobia. Yeah. And that's what I would like to talk a little bit about today, to also use one of her favorite phrases. In terms of the piece of putting everybody at ease, I'd like to see a show of hands here if she had a nickname for you. Do you see all these hands? Could a couple of you shout out your nicknames? Loud. A few more. Yeah, folk diva. And she was the jazz diva, the Motown jazz diva. Yeah, this is one of the ways that she put people at ease. This was so much about her gift for intimacy. And the other way that she put people at ease was the huge array of subject areas that she could talk to you about. I mean, truly, she could strike up a conversation with anybody. Massage therapy, golf, astrology, astronomy, the list went on. So she could find a common interest and form an instant connection with you. And then there was her avid curiosity, which many of us who've had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with Andrea's mother, May Lewis, have decided comes from May Lewis. Because in the last few days, even in Mrs. Lewis's grief, she is still taking the time to ask us many questions about ourselves and our interests and our families and our hobbies. So Andrea had this wonderful gift for curiosity, and as many people have already said, she was a wonderful listener. When you spoke, she knew she would be really paying attention closely to every word you said. Sometimes she'd be paying attention a little too closely for comfort, actually. You're like, oh, could you please just let that phrase slide? I really didn't mean it. But then we'd process. And so the main point that I'd like to make today is, let's all be more like Andrea. Let's be curious, and let's really listen to each other. When guests would come on the morning show and they were feeling a little worried about going on, she would say, don't worry. It's going to be like a dinner party conversation. And with Andrea, it always was. So that was her gift for putting guests, acquaintances, friends immediately at ease. And then there was the piece about also making you really take a good hard look at some of your own assumptions and privilege. And she relished doing this on the air. She relished coming up with a question for Ariana Huffington or Tavis Smiley that was really gonna sort of really get in there and challenge them. And I think one of the reasons she relished this was because she knew that even if they didn't appreciate it, the listeners would. But she also did it when it was much harder in interpersonal relationships one-on-one. And she did it with me within the first 6 months of our working relationship together. She was hired as the co-host of the show, and that was how she was credited. And 6 months into her tenure, she said, you know, Lisa, I also want to be credited as a producer on the show. And I'm really embarrassed to say that instead of having curiosity about why that was, I just got very possessive about my title. And I was like, why does this woman want, she's got all the glory of being the host. Why does she want this producer credit also? This little title is sort of all I've got going. And eventually, actually with the help of a mediator. She explained to me why. She explained to me that, as I'm sure is already clear to many people in the room, because you are not ignorant as I was, she explained to me that so often African Americans are credited as being the talent, and far too often they're not credited for intellectual contributions. And she was making a very significant intellectual contribution to the show, editorially, administrative support, lining up guests. And of course, when she said this, I had this aha moment. And she was credited thereon as a producer, as was Philip. Yeah. If Andrea gave you one of those aha moments in your relationship with her, would you raise your hand? Look at everybody raising their hand. Family, friends, co-workers, probably listeners too. It's been talked a lot about in various obituaries since she passed away that Andrea was the one to speak up. And I'd like to honor her memory right now by doing a little bit of fact-checking around that and talking about framing the issue, because Andrea was all about how the issue was framed. She would not have disputed the factuality of that statement. She was always the one to bring these issues up. But particularly in interpersonal relationships, this was not cause for celebration for her. She told me this took a terrible toll on her. She was tired of it, she was angry about it, and she wondered why she didn't have more allies in initiating conversations that were difficult. She felt very alone a lot of the time with this. So I want us to acknowledge that. And I want to say again, let's all be more like Andrea. The final quality that she had that I want to point out today, that I think really helps explain this wondrous dichotomy about her, about putting people at ease and putting them at profound dis-ease, was her compassionate spirit. That was the bridge. That was the bridge between the two. That's what made it possible. She, as has already been mentioned, always played devil's advocate if you were in a dispute with somebody. She wanted you to see their perspective. And she walked her talk about this. We had a conversation about how her cardiologist had taken 3.5 weeks to report to her the results of a very serious medical test that she had recently. And although she was obviously and understandably angry about this, she also said, well, the doctor was moving, and that does take a lot of time. She was also able to not have enemies. She saw people in their full complexity. She was telling me about a very deep conflict she was having with somebody. And in the middle of listing what was going on for her so articulately, she said, and you know, this person is a really good writer. How often when we're angry at somebody are we able to hold them, you know, hold their whole personality like that? Yeah. So that's what I want us to remember Andrea for. And in honoring her memory, I'd like to, I'm sure there are many wonderful ways that people will come up with honoring her memory. But the one that I'd like to suggest is what she requested of an audience not too long ago in Wisconsin when she was speaking on a panel on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the Progressive magazine. She requested of the audience that they speak up, particularly when it is challenging, when prejudice reveals itself at the dinner table or at the staff meeting. And for many of us who don't quite know where to start with that, I think she would have recommended a book by Robert Jensen that she really enjoyed, called The Heart of Whiteness, Confronting Race, Racism, and White Privilege. So before passing the microphone to my colleagues, I just want to say for the final time, let's cultivate our sense of compassion, our ability to listen, our curiosity, and let's all speak up, particularly when things are really difficult. And let's first all really try to be more like Andrea. Thank you.
Youth Outlook documents current events and issues going on in your community. For more information, go to youthoutlook.org.